Is Bitcoin halal?
If Bitcoin is haram, then your PDF, every software that uses haram. So the simple answer is, if that's halal, then why is this a problem? What about when there's a robot that comes and that robot's in this room and starts reciting the Quran? What's the implications of that? What are the responsibilities? What are the liabilities? We should never rush or be hasty into a yes and no, because an early no can harm a generation.
Meet a scholar, a change maker, and one of the leading minds in today's evolving Islamic finance landscape, Mufti Faraz Adam. He stands at the forefront of Islamic finance and FinTech globally and is a Sharia advisory to financial institutions across continents.
Thousands, if not millions of Muslims have turned away from Islam.
When we learn the Quran, we begin to see the world through the Quran. It's a playbook for entrepreneurship. We're literally missing that link between theory and practice today. We're heavily focused on the theory. We don't understand the theory was for the practice.
The educated, practicing Muslims are not quoting from local scholars. There's no doubt that the same scholar class coming from places like the UK and the US take a very different approach. Why is that?
In this part, we've embraced technology. We've been able to articulate our thoughts and able to connect with people across the world, which is meaningful to them because we're talking about today.
Mufti Faraz has authored essential works like Introduction to Islamic FinTech, penned numerous research papers on complex Sharia-compliant products, and delivered over 5,000 Sharia advisory responses on finance, helping bridge classical Islamic principles with cutting-edge technology.
We've become lazy. We're happy with the minimal amount of effort. Why are you sleeping 10 hours? It pains me.
Why the fear when it comes to something new? Because that fear is what puts us on the back foot. How do we just rethink this entire thing and instead look at Sharia not from a filter perspective, not on what is haram and we can't do, what is bringing benefit, and then let's build a product from there.
Get ready. This conversation won't just inform you, it will challenge how you see finance, faith, and the future. Stay tuned. This is Beyond Possible.
Welcome to Beyond Possible.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you.
15th century, the printing press came out in Europe, and by many accounts, from the Ottoman Empire to other Muslim strongholds at the time, there was a reluctance to embrace the technology of the printing press. And many would say that the printing press was a foundation for the dissemination of ideas, and the reluctance of certain regions at that time to embrace the printing press due to Sharia compliance in today's lingo, set some sections of the Muslim world behind. It happened to minor degrees with the microphone back during the late stages of the Mughal Empire. There's a microphone allowed during prayers. And obviously you and I have lived through the skepticism when it comes to Bitcoin, blockchain, which, especially given what's happening in the world today, why do we look at new technology from a arm's length as a skeptic versus saying, how can we take this new innovation and bring it to the world with the ethics and the ethos that we have a long heritage of?
There's a natural fear. There's this distance. A foreigner is bringing something in. And that fear is natural to man everywhere you go. But I think the way sometimes we look at things is in a binary, permissibility and impermissibility. And that's the biggest, I think, barrier and blocker. Instead of looking at it from a fatwa, yes and no, a binary type thing, we have to change our mindset to almost like a research type approach. Let's take it, let's learn with it, let's build with it, and then we start seeing things. So for instance, I wrote an article maybe about 5-6 years ago called the Sharia Sandbox idea, which is, as you're well aware, there's sandboxes across the world in different jurisdictions. The regulator takes an entity, new technology, a fintech, and works with them and sees them and helps regulate them and build their playbook. If the Sharia world also took the idea that let's build a Sharia sandbox whereby let us promote new technologies, new products, new ideas, but let's work with them. We have Sharia experts, lawyers, bankers, observing what is it, how does it work and function, and then later on, once it's clear, then we can have a yes and no. But until that, we should never rush or be hasty into a yes and no, because as we just mentioned, an early no can harm a generation.
Why should we even have that fear? Right? I mean, the Quran's been preserved in the hearts of men. So how does that happen? We obviously can't speak to that time. but you've been in many conversations with us, with many different Sharia authorities on Bitcoin. But to me, that was a unfounded fear when it came to the printing press in general, because the fear clouded the judgment that something like the Quran that has already, by that time, has gone through 1,300 years, 1,200 years, and it's not dependent on the printing press. What led to that? And what has not changed since then?
We lack super specialists in this era, and this era is about super specialism. It's no longer acceptable to be a generalist at all in this time and age. Scholars need to also up the game. Like, we have general scholars, but we need super specialist scholars now in different areas to be able to articulate the ideas which are being spoken of in different areas and different departments. But it's no longer good to just sit in a room and teach the theory. We have to be in the industry. And that's the biggest gap right now, which we're all facing and fearing. A 1 day delay in this day and age, you've lost.
I mean, compounding from that 1 day is tremendous.
Exactly. So every day that we don't wake up is a day that's lost. Not only 1 day, you've lost, as I mentioned, a generation. So it's really about understanding that night and day. Like, if you look at the classical scholars, how they were ahead of the time, right? So you look at Imam Muhammad and these great authorities, they were engaging with the traders, the merchants, the businessmen, understanding. They were talking about things. I mean, let's just look at this. They were not only solving problems that were presented to them, they were thinking about hypothetical scenarios and solving problems which hadn't even materialized.
And many times as students, we looked at those and saying, what's the need for that? But it actually, I mean, now when I look at it, especially in the context that we're discussing, it's ingenious.
Exactly.
Right? Because they took those hypothetical examples, they extrapolated possibilities, and then they applied a set of tools that enabled us to come back in. So what has led to this kind of thinking?
I think it's partly because we've created a compartmentalization of knowledge. That's one problem, where we think the Quran is only this and nothing but this. We don't understand that Sharia, when it was revealed, there was no kind of like, the deen was in its entirety. Everything was taught. There was no like, this is Quran, this is hadith, this is fiqh. Everything was taught together. You have to take the entire understanding. And secondly, we sometimes think of technology or sciences or these things which are foreign subjects. But really, the entire world is our scope of study. Right? So when we learn the Quran and look at what's in the Quran, we begin to see the world through the Quran. So we're literally missing that link between theory and practice today. And we're heavily focused on the theory. We don't understand the theory was for the practice. It was for the implementation. Not only that, it's all about leading mankind. Like, we have so much good to give. We were the entrepreneurs, we were the builders, we were the ones helping people, guiding people towards what's better in the real world. Because Islam is not just about for the hereafter. Rather, it's the world that you live in will be the best place if you follow the guidance, but then also act upon the principles. It's a playbook for entrepreneurship, literally. That's what it is. But we've not understood it holistically, or we're failing to embrace the full message.
That failing, obviously, I'm really focusing on those that we look up to for this advice, which are, scholars and ulama. Where does that break down in the production and the raising of the scholar class amongst us?
One of the major issues is we don't have a vision anymore. Generally, everybody, and especially students of knowledge, I think we don't just have a vision for our lives, or our vision is very narrow. We don't think we can literally be a trailblazer. And if we think like that, this false notion comes in our mind that we have pride in us or something along those lines. So there's sometimes these false ideas which hold us back, but we need confidence. We need knowledge. We need certainty. We need to have this vision. And this is what perhaps missing amongst most students of knowledge is they don't have a 50-year vision of their life or a 100-year vision of their life. It's just, I've graduated. Okay, now what? Let me just get a job. Let me just do this. But you have so much potential. You spent 6 years, 10 years studying. What's your 100-year vision? Like, I always ask students, articulate to me in one sentence what you're about and what you'll build when you pass away. Like, what is the one thing that you'll give to the world? And most of the people are just stuttering. And that's the reality. That just tells me everything. If you can't articulate what you are, who you are in one sentence, and what you'll do when you leave this world, that means you haven't really given thought to yourself.
Muslims think about Islamic finance. There's a loud contingent that says this is copycat. This isn't anything new. It costs us more. There's a group of Sharia scholars that, for lack of a better word, have become a faction that are the gatekeepers to the stamp of approval. Where does that come from? And the reason it's a segue from what you just mentioned is that where is the vision from the scholarly class on what Islamic finance should be?
There's many, I would say, issues here. One is the world that we live in. And so a faqih and a scholar, he has two eyes. One eye is on the here and now, and the other eye should be on tomorrow. That's the whole point, having two eyes, right? One, you're problem solving now. The people need a solution now, but at the same time, you need to be able to lead people to tomorrow. And it's the job of the scholar to slowly advise and guide and build that or bridge that gap that exists. So scholars are problem solvers. That's the reality. We have to solve problems of the people now. So the Islamic finance that we have today, given the context that we're in, the regulations, the taxation requirements, the laws and all of this, trying to build products within this regime and this kind of setup requires a more practical, pragmatic approach. That's why sometimes it seems copycat, because from a tax efficiency perspective, from a legal regulatory perspective, that's the only way it can work.
My theory on why people feel copycat, and I've obviously been an ardent supporter, and for many years I would be like, nope, it's not copycat because we do musharaka like this, and we do home loans like that, and we own the equity. I mean, and obviously those are valid to a certain degree, but to a certain degree, the theme of being copycat, I've come to realize recently, is true from the following perspective: is that there's no alternative vision. The vision has always been boxed into, for Islamic finance, to be like, what is not permissible, we need to avoid, right? And in the avoidance of what is not permissible, in other words, in the pursuit to stay compliant to Sharia principles, we have modeled a parallel example to what's happening in modern finance, right? And in avoiding what is haram and modeling something that parallels modern finance, but in a compliant way, I think it's justified to say that this is copycat. What is the alternative to this? The alternative to say this: how do we just rethink this entire thing and instead look at Sharia not from a filter perspective, not on what is haram and we can't do, but what is actually advised, what is the maqasid of what is bringing benefit, and then let's build a product from there, right? I mean, this is two ways to look at it, but I just feel that we've always been on the back foot saying we need to be compliant versus, what you've always said very nicely, which is something Sharia powered.
That's the very reason why I penned that book, which I shared with yourself, and you've written a foreword to it on prophetic finance and economics, where my entire thesis there was we need to approach finance from the sunnah, which is the pinnacle, because if you have the sunnah, you already have compliance. But we have more than compliance, you have ihsan. And prophetic finance is the model. It has to be the model. It's the only model, because that model is about empowering others. And that model it's prophetic, but it's also profit-making. Anything which is prophetic will always add value in this world and the hereafter. You're not going to lose. But I think we sometimes look at making money and morals and value and ethics as two things that can't come together. But they can. They absolutely can.
Before even Bitcoin, they were debating the realness of blockchain. What I wanted to have you do is kind of share how that conversation started and what do you glean from that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to understanding modern technologies and especially emerging technologies, we have questions which are completely, I was shocked, and I'm typically shocked by the questions I'm asked, because it's almost as though we are not awake. That's what it seems, because if we're questioning things like blockchain, digital assets, their existence.
Okay, can you just give the audience a background of what they were questioning?
Yeah, so the question that was raised was, do digital assets exist? What is blockchain a real thing? Is it all speculative and just, a Ponzi, effectively? So there were questions on the actual technology and underlying infrastructure, which powers the entire Web3 and digital assets world. Now, if questions are being raised at that level, then why are we not questioning the internet? Why are we not questioning domain names? Why are we not questioning PDFs?
No, so when I heard what happened in that conversation, I mean, the question was, is blockchain real? But then I would say, is IBAN real? Is SWIFT real?
What is real?
But the question is that if we're asking that without being able to recognize those scholars, and I mean this with due respect, they're using SWIFT and IBAN too. but why the fear when it comes to something new? Because that fear is what puts us on the back foot.
And that's the exact conversation we then had was, okay, do we all agree that PDFs exist and you can transfer and trade them? Of course, we all do it. Applications on your mobile phone. Have you ever asked yourself, is this Sharia compliant or not? No, we're using them. Why? Because you're engaging with them, you're using them, you're benefiting from them. The fundamental principle is benefit. Whatever is beneficial is acceptable. It's really that simple. But I think we get so like bogged down with the ones and zeros behind the app that I'm using. Is that Sharia compliant or not? That's irrelevant. That's how it's like there's a painting on the wall or a paint, and you're looking at the small like the small dots of paint underneath. So what is that made of? That's the kind of conversation we're having, right? So after the conversation, I think majority in that discussion, they were all on board as far as thinking, yeah, you know what? These are real questions. We understand now that it does exist. We're using the technology, and it's about time we engage thinking along these lines further.
I don't want to be negative Nancy on this because there's a flip side to this as well, which I want to bring up. You've taken a trailblazing element to this. People may not know, but the reason many different countries, Sharia authorities have wanted to speak to you, one of the reasons, obviously, because you're an expert, but the other reason is there's not many who have the thoughts and opinions of yourself. So when you look back, what led you to kind of take a more nuanced, more, let's say, well-researched approach versus the mainstream scholar class?
I would say perhaps there's two things, right? I chose curiosity over certainty. That's the first thing. That became my default. I questioned every single assumption, and I still question. The most basic things that we assume, I'll question it 50 times. And I'll keep questioning myself.
But when you question it, do you start with the default no?
I have a blank canvas. I literally think that, who said it's not
And where
wise?
did that come from? Because I'm sure you would agree that in the conversations that we're having with different national Sharia boards, they're not starting with a blank canvas. The tone has always been, this is literally haram.
Absolutely. Whereas in Sharia, the asl is ibaha, as you're well aware. Right? The discussion should be, okay, the default is all fine. You prove to me clearly that it's problematic, and then otherwise, let's carry on building.
So how did we end up here?
I'll be honest with you, and I say this with, and I'm being very genuine here, I started mixing with entrepreneurs, founders, and people who are not from the background, and just with general people, the laity. What we call laity, which that word is, I don't find it to be the best term. But when you just spend time with the normal, average people, educated people who are hardworking, and you have conversations with them, the questions they ask, it makes you think you ask yourself questions. Is that really the case? And what I love the most is when they ask why. If I can't explain to somebody who's genuine, wants to know why, that means I've not understood it myself. And it was questions of whys from these types of individuals who are genuine and really wanted to learn. That's when I realized, I don't know myself. And if I can't answer them, how can I answer anything? And so I changed my entire approach now. It's like, if I can't tell you why, I don't know. I can't speak about that subject. And then that pushed me like, what have I been doing in my life if I can't even explain a simple concept to you? So my approach was why first and then what.
What I'm about to say next might be a bit controversial, and I'm sure you would agree that by and large, default no, the skeptic scholar is the traditional persona. In the time that we live in, we're in London, there's no doubt that the same scholar class coming from places like the UK and the US take a very different approach. Then their equal aged, equal educated, equal learned counterpart in the countries that we've been talking about across Morocco to Malaysia. Why is that? Let's call it like it is, right? I want to be very clear. Like, scholars from a Western background definitely have a different approach, right? And what I found, Mufti Sahib, is, and this is my personal opinion, is that, when I go to Jakarta, when I'm in Islamabad, when I'm in Dhaka, when I'm in Istanbul, by and large, the educated, practicing Muslim there are not quoting from local scholars. They're mentioning Imam Omar Sulaiman, people like yourself, Noman Ali Khan, What has led to that?
Well, in this part, we've embraced technology, number one. I think that's a clear...
This is dissemination of...
and that exactly. So we've been able to articulate our thoughts and able to connect with people across the world, which is meaningful to them because we're talking about today. That's I think the number one issue. Are you able to connect with a person and talk about things which actually affects them in the real world, in the here and now, and you're relevant to them? When you're relevant, people will come to you. When you're irrelevant, nobody's going to bother. And so it's a matter of relevance. And so these individuals who you've named, they're doing phenomenal work, but what they do is they bring people close to, again, not to themselves, but the Quran and Sunnah, but making them understand in their life. So it's no longer abstract. And I think this is the biggest weakness that many of us have, where when we speak about things, we're very abstract. And it was never meant to be abstract. It's meant to be a lived reality.
And I say this because it's from a place of pain. Because, you know, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Dhaka, Islamabad, you know, Istanbul, Lagos, how many thousands, if not millions of Muslims are not exposed to this thinking and have turned, maybe not away from Islam, but turned aloof to it, right? Because they're not getting that today, that contemporary look at how to live their life today, which is very sad, right? But how are those bridges? How can we bridge that gap?
I've been Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, all these places, to be honest, and even just answering queries for the last like 10, 15 years. When you read about the questions, I mean, this is might sound weird, but I get queries from all these countries regularly. Like since 15 years, I've been getting queries. I always tell them, you have local scholars. Why are you coming to me here in the UK? Like, I can't benefit you more than they're much better people than me. Go there. But they're still asking here.
Why do they do that?
I just think it's accessibility. Literally, I think one is accessibility, and perhaps they feel that what I have, something will be given to them which actually makes sense. And I think most people, what we do, and this is perhaps the biggest mistake, we still think that the average person satisfied with a yes or no. But that's not the world we live in anymore. Today, the average person wants to understand and make sense of things, and they're intelligent. And we sometimes assume that they're not intelligent, or we come from a high pedestal and thinking, yeah, well, if I just say this, it's okay, it's going to work, it's going to fly. But it doesn't fly anymore. And that's where I believe there has to be some humility in anybody saying any position or view, in that you have to be able to articulate it in a way which makes sense. And when you make people understand, they'll always be with you, they'll always come behind you, they'll always follow your work. So if you can simply articulate ideas where that person understands and appreciates, you've won them over. Because people are curious, intellectually curious, and you fed that curiosity. If you don't, then to be honest, you'll be replaced by AI sooner or later, which is happening already.
Which is happening. So look, you know, there was a recent case in Facet. I was talking to someone who heads our customer service at Facet, and you know, he was taking honestly, he was taking what he was being told by our compliance team. So in any banking financial services app like ours, you have to do KYC, you have to put your documents in, you have to check your documents to make sure that this is not money laundering, that you're who you say you are. And what was happening on Facet for the longest time is that we were putting average people who are hardworking through enhanced due diligence, right? So we were telling them, thank you for sending so many documents. We're going to have to ask you 50 more questions, and before we can let you invest and save on the Facet platform. And what we found out is that 99.99% of those who we unwittingly put through enhanced due diligence led them to not opening their account in Facet and being scared and being kind of put off by the situation. Now, there are parallels to Sharia compliance on this, because we took a very letter of the law, highly skeptical view on someone in a country like Bangladesh who wants to put $50 of their $500 salary into tokenized gold. And I was telling my customer service team that the amana on you as the head of customer service is to make sure that when that young man or woman who wants to put $50 of their hard-earned savings in a Sharia compliant halal way to save, if you turn them away because you didn't ask our compliance team the right rules and regulations and we became overbearing, that $50 that they didn't put in, that didn't compound, that they couldn't save, that responsibility and burden is on you. That's on one example. Now, if they turned away and said, you know what, I'm going to go and put this $50 into a CFD, into a derivative, into a gambling site, into a meme coin, that's even worse. And that burden and that responsibility, Facet customer service team, that's on you. Because our mission is to help our people from Morocco to Malaysia to responsibly save in a halal way. Now, to our team's credit, they took that heavily because there's a heavy burden. Just because we say no because of some regulation that we overly interpreted doesn't mean that you did the right thing. Because that person who chose to go away or chose to do something haram, there's a burden of responsibility on our team. So in this example, coming back to the topic that we wanted to answer today is Bitcoin halal. The scholars that took a long time or who have not yet come around to, in my opinion, what is very obvious right now, that this is halal. And the people that have decided, you know what, I've given up on Islamic finance, or people who instead of coming in at $10,000 price have now come at $100,000. If you add the summation of the cost of that indecision, that late decision, or the wrong decision, in your opinion, whose burden of responsibility is that? Who bears that burden? Who bears that cost?
When I think about the opportunity cost of late opinions or just not being diligent enough in doing the research or simply saying, it's better to avoid, these lazy answers, it's burdensome. You rather not give an opinion.
There's blood on hands, because you're dealing with people's money. You're dealing with compounding. You're dealing with people's livelihoods.
I was telling the team once in Facet, I think perhaps in Indonesia, Pakistan, that we think of these as just products, but they're more than that. When the gold, for instance, the products that we have, whether it's staking or anything, what you're doing effectively is you've just unlocked marriage for a single individual there. If he never had this product, he may not have been able to get married for 15, 20 years. You've made that into 5 years. Or you've become the means of a father who couldn't be educated because he never had the money, but now his son's going to go to university and get a degree. That's what your product is. Or there's somebody who's had this wish and desire to go for Umrah or Hajj or something along these lines, and this product has unlocked the opportunity. Right? So a product is not just the transaction or the remittance or the saving. The actual product is the opportunity you've unlocked. But we don't think of the product in that way. And that's the biggest mistake.
Huge.
Because this is just a vehicle.
Huge.
Right? And so when we begin to realize it's people's lives, which is really what the product is, we're trying to help people's lives. And that's what makes Facet so fascinating for me. It's like the markets that we're engaging with, think about the generational change up here we're doing. It's literally generational change because the next generation will be educated, will be married early, and they'll have their houses for the first time in their lives. People who've been living hand to mouth will have a roof over their head and it's their own. They'll have ownership. And so that's massive. It's not the same as providing a product for somebody who lives in the UK or in London or in America somewhere where this is extra cash just throwing around. It's not the same.
But there's a burden on the decision making, right?
Absolutely.
Because that person in Indonesia, that person in Bangladesh, they are almost desperately asking the scholar that, can I put $10 here? And the scholar says no, or no decision, or he incorrectly says this is wrong. And you add that up for 200 million people. And it's painful when I think about it, right?
That's why I said in the beginning that super specialism is a need of this era. If we don't super specialize, and there has to be intellectual humility. If I focusing on finance or digital assets, for instance, I should not be speaking on matters to do with marriage and marital matters, talaq for that matter, or anything. If I'm speaking on finance, I should not be speaking on halal food. I let the halal food guy deal with that. And so we have to deal with Sharia in this particular way and knowledge in this way. In any other industry, you do not have this thing where you have one person speaking on all matters. And think about doctors and surgeons. You have a specialist for every single body part because it's life and death. The same example is true for here. And that's why we need specialists in every single area. And only that specialist should speak, and they become the authority. They support it and they become the authority in that area. And I think that's when we'll see real change and exponential growth. Until that doesn't happen, the compass and the dial is not going to move.
So what should the layman do in this context?
To be honest, what I've seen, those who have any interest in these types of discussions, majority of them have made their own decisions already, because it's made sense to them. They're convinced. Between them and Allah, they say, look, this is what it is, and there's definitely now there's scholars, quite a few scholars are coming forward and saying, yes, it is Sharia compliant, it is acceptable. So now there's there's a critical mass, I believe, that has been reached to some extent, especially in these parts of the world, where it's become almost a normal opinion now.
So I was in Indonesia. This reminds me of a story. We were having dinner with a Sharia blockchain association made up of scholars. And the opinion in Indonesia, I think that still prevails today, is that the ulama have said Bitcoin is haram. So now in this closed door dinner that I was having with the Sharia blockchain association, I was like, in this country, everyone considers Bitcoin haram. And they're like, yes. Then I was like, I just want to understand, how many of you have bought Bitcoin? And 90% of the hands went up in the room. And the sad part about that is that actually is not good, because that means we've lost faith in the class of leaders that we need to look up to and believe at face value. Because I may be an expert in Bitcoin, but I will not be an expert in, biotech. So I'm not going to have, me as a layman, I'm not going to have that expertise to, if you tell me that some new medicine is haram, I actually want to be like, okay, yeah. But, when I saw that in the room that, there's 13 young scholars in Indonesia that are living under the banner of Bitcoin's haram, but when I ask them who owns Bitcoin, 12 of them say yes. It's not a good place to be.
Again, this just comes back down to that super specialization and having experts. And I think, but people are waking up. That's what I'm seeing. Younger scholars, the conversations I've been having, people are realizing that, we need to put resources behind this. We need to put time. We need to put effort. And it all begins, like, this one thing which I always tell friends and always remind myself as well. We have to be 4 o'clock people. Wake up at 4 a.m. We become lazy. We become lazy individually. Everybody has. In this world that we live, we're lazy. We're happy with the minimal amount of effort. We're always happy with the minimum. We want the most, but we don't make the effort for that. So there's no effort. And that laziness has killed us in every single way. We're just happy we're consumers. This is what we are. We're not producers. And so there needs to be a 180 shift, a complete 180 degree shift towards actually being producers. Producers means you have to have your sleeves rolled up. You have to work early in the morning and you do something. And when you have that consistency, that will naturally, over 10 years, you'll see after 10 years where you are. And that's what's missing now. But inshallah, in the scholarly class, I believe there's a revival taking place in the sense that people are realizing that if we don't work hard, you'll become obsolete. And that's what's happening. And that will happen with the way things are going.
So now, to kind of get to the crux of this, is Bitcoin halal?
If Bitcoin is haram, then your PDF, every software that uses is haram. So the simple answer is, if that's halal, then why is this a problem? This is software. That's all it is. It's as simple as that. So my personal view is, it is halal. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever.
A leading scholar of our time who mentioned that Bitcoin is haram on the basis that it's not sanctioned by any particular government.
If you equate Bitcoin to currency, by El Salvador, right, it was a legal tender. So what's the difference between that and any other currency? But I think that worry and concern comes from we're equating Bitcoin to a fiat currency, and they don't want to blur the lines between the two. Hence that opinion.
And you're saying that it's not.
No, it's not a fiat currency. It's not a parallel to fiat currency in any way, shape, or form. This is its own thing. So we shouldn't these are extrinsic discussions. So the governance issue, the currency issue, this doesn't apply to Bitcoin.
The other very popular critique is that it's highly speculative.
Penny stocks are more speculative.
Are penny stocks halal?
And this question I always ask scholars: if the if the business is Sharia compliant and it meets the financial criteria, who's going to say it's haram? So if penny stocks, despite being highly volatile and illiquid, can be Sharia compliant, And startup investing, where according to some stats, 90% of startups fail in the first 2 years.
Highly speculative, absolutely.
What is that?
For all the right reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But if you can say that's Sharia compliant, then what's wrong with this?
And when you say that to scholars, what do they say?
There's nothing to say.
Excellent.
Because we just have to think, like, what are we actually saying? We don't think what we're saying and what the implications of that are. And that's the problem.
One thing I've noticed in this, in kind of building Facet and going country to country, is that the Sharia boards are very siloed domestically. Malaysia has Malaysia, Indonesia has Indonesia. What do we need to create a more homogeneous group and understanding across countries?
I think that one of the reasons why they are siloed is just because of cultural understanding and fiqh, kind of like every area.
Because the technologies are universal.
But classically, until now, it's just been like, okay, Malaysia has a particular fiqh approach, and then it only makes sense for their scholars, right? Somebody from here wouldn't really understand the fiqh there, and likewise, someone from there wouldn't understand the fiqh here, right? So there's a few differences and nuances.
But all I would say to that is that, Facebook, Netflix, Google, ChatGPT are all now part of the cultural lingua franca, across borders. Why not certain opinions and scholars? Why don't we operate on that basis as well?
I think this is the next evolution that we're waiting for, where we see this like international thought leadership think tank, where we have people really now discussing issues which are yet to come. Like, that's what we need to create. I'm not talking about yesterday's issues. And I think we're still so fixated on issues which have been debated for 30 years. But we really need to start thinking about, okay, what about when there's a robot that comes and that robot's in this room and starts causing damage or reciting the Quran? What's the implications of that? And how do I engage with that? What are the responsibilities? What are the liabilities? These are the types of conversations we need to start having. And that will unlock and unearth a whole new kind of treasure chest of knowledge.
And financially, when you talk to young people around the world, what is your advice now? What is the most halal way to build a portfolio, have flexibility, but still remain within the bounds of the ethics and the principles that we share?
One of the things I want to say is avoid taking too much debt. Avoid debt as much as possible. And just work hard. Like for youngsters and the youth, your initial income is your salary, your sweat and labor. That's where it starts from. But at the same time, try to transition into entrepreneurship. It's not for everybody. But for those who are hardworking, who have a mind, who want to build and produce and who can do it, then phase out from your 9 to 5 and then go into some kind of like build something on the side. We just have to have a passion. And people are content with a 9 to 5 life, that robotic life. But nobody's passionate about, I want to leave a legacy. People talk about leaving legacies, but for our kind of conversation in the Muslim world, it's not about leaving a legacy. It's about what are you taking with you in the after. It's a completely different mindset. Because your legacy will be a legacy, but in our context, in our narrative, it's what you're taking with you. What you're building is, you're not building for somebody else, you're building for yourself. You've got 24 hours. Why are you sleeping 10 hours? Honestly, that pains me. Like, why are you sleeping 10 hours, 12 hours? It just doesn't make sense. But why are you waking up? You're missing your fajr in the morning every day. That's the best time. That 4 o'clock in the morning till 8. That time is gold. Like, you've experienced that. Whoever's experienced that time consistently, all great things happen between 4 and 8 a.m. It's always happened. You've probably, so many ideas have unlocked for yourself at that time. So many great things have come and been opened up at that time. But we're sleeping at that time. So we need to change the fundamentals. It's simple changes. But with those simple fixes, there'll be an entire revolution.
If you had $100,000 right now and you're 25 years old, 30 years old, in a country between Morocco to Malaysia, you're a young person, what do you do with that? What is your advice to them?
Very good question. So, there has to be some allocation in Bitcoin for sure, right? There'll be some Bitcoin in there. There'll be some gold in there. At the same time, I would look also, is there anybody in my family who has a bit of need? So I'd make some allocations. Maybe there's somebody who's in debt. Maybe somebody who's in need and I can change their life. So definitely an allocation of my wealth to help people around me. And then I wouldn't let it just sit in fiat for sure. Perhaps If I have access to stocks and these types of things, a small thing. If I'm educated, I'll perhaps invest more in there. Otherwise, I'll just put it in an ETF or something, and that's okay for me. And then the rest of the funds, whatever's available, I'd invest in myself and learning. I think, this is another point I just want to raise, is for students of knowledge. We finish our formal studies and that's the end of education. Rather, we should be studying continuously because knowledge is democratized today. You don't need to go to university. If you really want to learn something, YouTube, honestly, everything's available. Knowledge is free. It's there. Yeah, a degree is not free, but knowledge is free. And so we tend to stop studying, and that's when the decline begins. Whereas classically, scholars would continuously study until the last moment. And so studying and being a student is until your last breath. And that goes for everybody. The best investment you can make. So with the 100,000, although you've invested here and there, you've put a bit of money everywhere, but you use that to power yourself, that'll give you the biggest gains.
Love that.
In the end.
Love that. Mufti Sahib, given your context and your experience, what would your humble advice be to an established student of knowledge, an established alim of deen?
I would say to any student of knowledge is find your niche and excel in it. Be the best in the field. And that goes out to every single student of knowledge. And then try to make that knowledge relevant, practical. Don't only let it be theory. Every knowledge has a practice to it. So the theory connected to the practice, and then share it with people, make it relevant in people's lives. And that's when it'll just be a conversation then between the theory and practice. And that's how you grow as an individual.
Very powerful. What would your advice be to a Islamic finance skeptic, someone who's said that this is a copycat industry, someone who said that, I don't see any innovation, this is a rubber stamp? What would your message be to them?
I would say ask questions of why. That's perhaps the most important thing. When you have conversations, you want to understand why, because those concerns, many of the time, and most of the time, I'll be honest with you, because I've dealt with many skeptics and I've had discussions with them. And although we tend to agree to disagree at the end, but I always listen to what they have to say. There's always some value in it for me. What's my value and benefit is I get to look at and think of a different perspective. And then that helps me build my articulation and the way I explain things. So speak to people who are ready to have a conversation and explore the why of your question and the why of Islamic finance. And you need to go layer by layer, level by level, as deep as you can. You need to get to the nuts and bolts and start the conversation again from literally ground zero and start up again. And if you do the whole thought process, then sometimes you'll understand, okay, maybe the sukuk are structured in this particular way. Yes, these are the objections. We're not happy about these things, but for this reason, there's a context. And perhaps one of the biggest things that's missing is what you said earlier, the vision. Most of these people want to see a vision. They want to see a roadmap. They're frustrated because they don't see that roadmap. But if we could simply show them and say, look, we're here because of this issue right now, but in 10 years' time, this is where we're moving. I think 90% of critics will go silent because they can see, okay, we're here because of this, but this is the actual end goal and end game.
You're absolutely right.
And that's what's missing today.
So what is your vision of Islamic finance in 20 years?
Yeah, so my vision of Islamic finance is where it's just finance for everyone, wherever you are, whichever background, and it just becomes the norm. Then it's not the tag or the title or the rubber stamp or the mufti, which is convincing you to buy the product. It's the product itself which sells itself. Until we don't get there, then we haven't done ihsan.
What do you say to the skeptic of Bitcoin?
Ask yourself 1,000 times, why are you saying it's prohibited? And every reason you get, ask that, is that really true? Ask yourself why there as well. And then look around you. Look at the things that you're dealing with and engaging with. And then perhaps if that is not convincing enough for you, then don't give a view, just read and study. We don't study, we don't read, we simply say X person has said this or Y person has said this, and that becomes sufficient for us. But that's not the basis of anything. He said, she said, doesn't cut it anymore. You have to understand the thing yourself and then come to a conclusion.
Love that. Mufti Sahib, thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure.
Outstanding.